The following is an emergency podcast episode about the war in Ukraine. All monetization of this episode will be going to Global Giving's Ukraine Crisis Relief Fund. Please consider making a donation yourself. Link in the show notes. China's foreign policy and the EU response today, recording on Sunday the 27th. Today we have here with me Ivana Karásková, who is the
Map and Funds leader and also the leader of China Observers in Central and Eastern Europe, the acronymist choice.
Let's start off with 100,000 people showing up on the streets today in Prague. What is driving, before we get into the sort of political response and the sanctions and air flight restrictions and whatnot, what's driving so many people's revulsion with what's happening in Ukraine?
Well, Prague is not an exception, as you said, Jordan. There have been protests everywhere in Riga, in Warsaw, basically anywhere you look in Central and Eastern Europe, you will see demonstrations of supporting Ukraine and condemning the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. When it comes to the Czech Republic, well, we are a heavily traumatized nation. We have been occupied twice, in 1938 by Hitler's Germany and in 1968 by Soviet Union. So we are quite familiar with having tanks, having occupiers on our land and so on. And we did fight, but we basically lost. So there's a heavy trauma. So showing in support of Ukraine, showing in condemning the invasion is basically something we feel that there is this moral obligation to do.
And turning now to the political response, how much is that? How much of that sort of moral revulsion do you think is driving what's happening at the political level? Because there are plenty of other arguments in favor. I mean, we're falling off of a base of people having much more mixed opinions when it comes to how to deal with Putin and China.
Well, I have to say that I'm honestly as well surprised as probably you are, because we are used to think about European Union as being incredibly slow, bureaucratic, being driven by Germany, which for its own historical trauma is not willing to engage. It's basically advocating non-action and trying to do the change through trade approach with Russia, but also with China. So I am actually surprised. I would never dreamed of seeing something like that just in Wednesday, and it's Sunday. And what we do see is an incredible level of sanctions targeting every single area, be it economy, be it military, be it the support of hackers, being it we have seen, which is not the EU, but basically we still think of them as part of the EU sometimes. We have seen the British Prime Minister saying that she will personally support every single Brit which is willing to go and fight for Ukraine. So these are things which I have never imagined I would see in my life. There are two very powerful narratives circulating within the EU. The first one is that Putin is a new Hitler, and we are in a very similar situation as in 1938 when it comes to Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic and Slovakia, or in 1939 when it comes to Poland. And the second very powerful narrative is that this is the September 11th moment for Europe. And these are two very, very symbolical narratives, something we have not dealt with personally in the past. So now it basically is bubbling up everywhere. And when we talk about 27 EU member states, 12 of them are in Central and Eastern Europe. So we are talking about 12 heavily traumatized countries, which basically pushed, together with the other allies as well, of course, pushed Germany to reconsider its policy, the policy it has been advocating for the past 30 years. So that's quite a powerful, actually, achievement.
Let's go one level deeper on Germany, because I think it's not super surprising that the Poland and Czech Republic and the Czech Republics that the Polands and Czech Republics of the world would feel so strongly about what's happening in Ukraine, given the history and historical ties. But I'm curious, what do you think was the sort of tipping point or confluence of factors that really led to the changes in German policy, as you alluded to?
Well, I think there were probably two items on the table, or two narratives, if you wish. The first one was, of course, this, let's say, moral argument, which was most likely meant by the Polish representative Morawiecki, where he visited Olaf Scholz and basically told him, which we don't know what he told him, but I can imagine that he probably told him, act now or you will be seen as basically helping another Hitler. And that's quite powerful, I think, when it comes from Poland. So one was probably, let's say, emotional blackmail, if you want, or using this kind of narrative. And the other one is that Central and Eastern European countries showed that they are willing to act, that there are citizens who are basically demanding that they act, that they supply weapons to Ukrainians. So it was now or never, and the EU talking about its strategic autonomy. If the EU would not do anything, that would mean that it will lose 12 out of its member states, who will single-handedly basically ask the US to establish permanent bases on its territory and defend them and basically honor the NATO NATO articles. So in case they are attacked, and Russia invading Ukraine, and if Ukraine is actually will be a part of the Russian territory, that would mean that we will have direct boundaries, direct frontiers with Russia, and that's increasingly problematic because it may mean that there is going to be, or it's a high likelihood of a conflict with the Russian Federation. So I think that was also a strategic argument that if Germany not reconsider its position, that it may lead towards really having the US not only somewhere, across the pond, but having the US heavily present in Central and Eastern Europe.
Ivana, how much of Ukraine's Ukraine's resistance and this not being a war that ended in 2 days shape the Central European and ultimately European response?
I would just speculate because I have no idea, and it's quite recent, and the situation changes every day with every hour, so it's quite difficult to say. But I also think that perhaps coronavirus epidemic played some role in this as well, that we basically need to see some good stories. We need to see some heroism and something great happening again. So that may be one of the reasons as well behind that. But if I may perhaps just continue the idea about how this is going to change the European security architecture. No matter what will happen to Ukraine, definitely Putin basically achieved one single goal, and that's that we would like to reshape our European security architecture, but not in the way he probably intended. So that means that it would not be justifiable now not to basically increase the military spending. Germany already announced that they will spend 2% of their GDP on military spending, which is a huge amount of money. I have seen analysts saying, or numbers saying, that if they actually do that, they will spend more on the military than Russia and France together. So, and the other countries will have to follow that. Well, sometimes when I look at the tweets on how many weapons are now sent to Ukraine on basically hourly basis, pledges from Denmark, pledges from Sweden, Germany, and so on. It seems like game of card, a poker, where you basically want to beat your someone you're playing cards with. No, I will give more RPGs than your country, and so on. So it's interesting really to see the dynamics, emotions behind that. And what is now also important is to think about really how to structure the security architecture after that. And I think it's quite visible that the military spending will have to happen here after the invasion.
Yeah, I mean, that said, it is really sad still seeing videos of Ukrainian soldiers who don't have helmets and body armor. And I think it's worth sort of reflecting that this is also, probably people feeling really guilty in these capitals that these armaments and support weren't in Ukrainian hands 3 months ago.
Yeah, definitely. There is a lot of self-reflection on that and feeling shame that this didn't happen before. But on the other hand, there is also the moral high ground, if you wish, because Putin was repeatedly told off to rethink the invasion, not to do that, to maintain the peace and so on. And he basically underestimated the European response heavily. And he was thinking probably that Europeans are those, guys and girls with lattes and glued to their iPhones discussing gender equality and talking about climate change. That was basically wrong. That's yes, we do that, of course, but in times of crisis, this is going, out of the window, and we focus on survival.
Yeah. Did history ever really end for Eastern Europe?
That's a good question. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. As long as we have authoritarian regimes basically attacking and advancing to the borders, that didn't happen, really. And China is actually falling into the same category of the countries. There are countries are already calling spade the spade. The Czech Republic, for example, the broadcasters, the talking heads during the
well, 1 second. Let's stay away from Ivana. Let's stay away from China for 1 second. Let me rephrase my question, because maybe I can ask it a little tighter. Like, was the 90s and early 2000s were a special time in Central and Eastern Europe, and I'm curious, to what extent that sort of moment of not being stressed out, about existential crisis had ever left the body politic, in that, or sort of was that fear and anxiety always lurking, just one or two layers below the surface?
I think it's the latter. It's still it was still lurking somewhere, and there is basically a divide between Central and Eastern Europeans and Western Europeans, where Central and Eastern Europeans warned repeatedly Western Europeans that Russia is not to be trusted, that Russia is a problem, that Putin is actually a problem and his regime is a problem. And they were labeled as, warmongers or paranoids. And now it's, good time to say we told you, but on the other hand, it would have been better if this cognitive dissonance was not there in the first place.
Ivana, how, if at all, is this going to reshape European views and policies towards China going forward?
That's a good question, really, because so far we have been focusing on Russian Federation heavily, and China has been seen as relative newcomer to the region, as the power we do not understand well. We don't have that much historical connection with. Because apart from some of the countries in Western Balkans, we considered China to be basically an enemy during the whole Cold War. We were on the side of Soviet Union, which regarded Chinese communism as basically a deviation of the pure communism. So Central and Eastern European countries didn't study China. We do have really great sinology focusing on language and culture and so on, but not on modern China, not on political science, basically. So there's a little understanding still about China, what it is and so on. But by extension to what we know about Russia, I do see that the perceptions are quite similar on the fact that it's an authoritarian regime. So that's basically shaping very much the perceptions of Central and Eastern Europeans. And China helping and supporting the Russian narrative in international space is, of course, not going unnoticed.
So let's now turn to the view from Beijing, because at some level they have to be aware of these trade-offs, right? What do you think, maybe start off, if we want to play the speculation game, what do you think was going through Xi's head as this war started and as it's evolving? How's he feeling about the situation he's in right now?
Okay, if it's a speculation game, and I can be a novelist basically coming up with anything, well, then I would be I would think that he basically knew about what was coming, that Putin probably told him on February 4th during the Olympic Games that the invasion or the plans for Ukraine are this or that. that China was not surprised by the invasion and so on. What is quite interesting for me, if I may take it from the speculation to the real reality, is how the narrative changed actually from the Chinese side. That they started first saying quite in a cautious way that they do understand Russian concerns regarding the enlargement of NATO. And then now, a couple of days later, they basically talk about that the war in Ukraine was started by NATO. It was started by the US. So it's no longer that we acknowledge Russian position is this and that. It's basically they now own this position. And it's quite interesting. So either they basically changed the position or it was a smokescreen from the very beginning. I don't know.
Do you think Beijing understands how much this is changing views in Europe?
No, I think they also underestimated Europeans, thinking that they are weak, that they will always prefer economy for and comfort. And we basically do, unless we basically feel that we are threatened for life. So I think that they were basically miscalculating the same way as Moscow was doing.
What else do you want me to ask Ivana about the Chinese side?
Let me think. I no longer know. Sorry, I'm tired as well. Maybe if I can ask you a question, and then I will think about what basically.
Yeah, sure.
My perception here is that the US is heavily underreported in the European press. Like all the information we are now consuming are about the Ukraine, about the invasion, about Russia, just a little bit, tiny bit about China, lots about intra-European affairs, and almost nothing about the US. And I'm just thinking whether this, from the US side, point of view or US side, is this intentional? How do you basically see American reaction? Because is the US doing something?
Yeah. I mean, I as a human being am in a weird bubble. As the I guess fourth generation of some Eastern European Jews who works in foreign policy, that everyone in my little universe is very very, very focused on this. I think what you've seen is a real, well, first off, I'm very happy we have Joe Biden and not Donald Trump in the presidency right now, because Trump would have responded very differently. I think there's kind of no doubt about it. So what has the Biden response been? There's been this a real sort of triumph, I guess, of the U.S. intelligence community in knowing that this was happening and trying to lay the foundation. I thought it was really interesting, the story that came out in the New York Times of America trying to warn China that this was happening, and sort of begging Xi to tell Putin off and tell him it was a bad idea. Who knows if you never know with that sort of reporting how real it is.
Yeah, it felt like making the link, between Russia and China. Also, let's not forget China. It's responsible as well. They knew they didn't act, and so on. We warned them.
Yeah.
So, never know.
And I think it's relatively easier for the U.S. to put these sanctions on than Europe, because the sort of percentage GDP hit that America is going to be taking for throwing all the Russian banks offline and stopping exporting to Russia is a lot lower than than what European countries are about to have to stomach at the level the sanctions currently are and are likely going to be trending in the next few days. So it's the response has been large. I mean, I don't know how much skin off America's back it would have been to 2x or 3x the amount of aid that has been the amount of military aid that has been going so far. But I think it's been really, I think it's not surprising. I'm more surprised at the ferocity of the European response than I am with the U.S., because I think this was America trying to go for the maximalist position on this sort of thing was pretty baked in my view. I mean, the question now I have is to what extent this is going to, bring focus away from China. But I actually think that the sort of aperture for foreign policy focus and competitiveness and military spending across the board is going to go up a lot after this sort of thing. And I think thinking of sort of pivot to Asia or whatever as a zero sum game with limited resources is not the right frame. Is not the frame that's going to take hold. I think more it's going to be American policymakers and politicians looking at the world as a dangerous place and sort of responding accordingly by sort of putting more attention and more spending and more a wider aperture on the table for doing things with allies to sort of shore up defenses. I mean, I think the ability for the U.S. to mobilize global sanctions and get Japan on the board and Singapore signing up for sanctions. I think that is a real testament to the work that the Biden administration has put in over the past year of building these bridges, because if it's hard to kind of get that level of coordination if you haven't already been working at it and you don't know who the right names are, and you don't have sort of working relationships which have been built over the course of the past year in a way which they weren't in the 4 years prior. So I'll give them top marks for that for sure. And we'll just have to see. I mean, we're now getting into the danger zone, right? Because the West has played their card, and Putin's about to of the sort of dramatic escalation and sanctions and sending arms and whatnot. But Putin's about to play his, and we're not, and no one really knows what that's going to be. Is that going to be a really awful, violent, carpet bombing of these cities? Is that going to be a negotiation? Is that going to be a nuclear weapon dropped on, or tactical nuclear weapons dropped on Ukrainian positions? People don't really know. But I think, as you said, I think the U.S. domestic response, the magnitude of that, I think was pretty predetermined, but using the tools of diplomacy and using the tools of diplomacy to get the entire world on this, I think the Biden administration should get a fair amount of credit for. Let's talk about the UN a little bit. What do you see as the dynamics going on there?
Well, the fact that China abstained from the first vote on the resolution condemning Russian attack was quite expected. That's no surprise. The fact that India also abstained, no surprises there as well. Though I think that when they are going to meet through the Quad format, there is going to be some awkwardness with the US regarding that. But historically speaking, there has been always a very high correlation of the votes between China and Russia and between China and India, much higher than there ever was a high correlation between China and the US. So this was basically expected. What is going to be very interesting is that today the Security Council is going to vote about another resolution for whether the General Assembly will vote regarding the resolution on Ukraine, because it needs only 9 member states to vote for. And during the previous resolution, they already had 11. That's quite sure that this is going to pass tonight. And then we will see General Assembly basically taking position on that. So 193 member states will be asked about whether they vote for, against, or abstain. And that's going to be a very interesting moment, because if they choose, they can actually say why they vote the way they vote. So we may actually get some more of information on whether China is going to abstain on and so on. And China has been positioning itself as the leader of the developing countries, the leader of G77 club. So we may see, and that may be interesting, how the voting will go regarding the African countries, the countries where to which China delivered a lot of official development assistance, where China basically invested into, and so on. So that may be quite telling regarding coalitions and the positions, not so much on Russia and Ukraine, but I think on the US and China.
Ivana, I'm trying to close these interviews on a somewhat optimistic note. I talked to Mate about the summer I spent in Bratislava going to the Pohoda Music Festival, which was this like really happy like left wing thing. I wonder if you have any like music festival memories to share weirdly about stuff in the Czech Republic. Is this something that was on your radar at one point in life, or?
Yeah, we have also the very interesting, it's called Colors of Ostrava. And Ostrava is this very strange, well, I'm Prager, so I call everyone strange who is living outside of the capital. But this is really a strange region. It's a very down-to-earth region with lots of coal mines, old coal mines and so on. So the festival is taking place is one of the like decommissioned coal mining place or area, and it's usually quite cool, so you can visit.
Okay, we'll put it on the agenda.